First thing we're going to talk about is probably one of the biggest talking points at the end of Abu Dhabi, which is Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes, going to Ferrari. And Toto Wolff had a nice message for him over the radio on the slowing down lap. He said, Lewis, if we can't win, you should win. And obviously, when we talk about Lewis and Toto and Mercedes, there's that missing eighth title. Everyone's got an opinion on what happened in 2021. Mercedes is very clear that they felt that that title was taken from them. Lewis the same. So, Nate, this is such a big moment. What was it like on the ground in Abu Dhabi? It almost felt like he was leaving the sport at one stage.
Well, it did. Somebody joked to me, it's like, he's not retiring. He's just literally changing teams. He's going from one great team to another, and getting paid pretty well for it. Just on that quote, I think Sebastian Vettel's old quote of everyone's a Ferrari fan, even if they say they're not. Maybe Toto's secret Ferrari fan. But it was strange. I mean, what it felt like was the end of an era. When you actually look back, when you actually dig into the numbers of Lewis at Mercedes, it is unbelievable, especially when you remember the framing of it. So many people thought that was the wrong move. So many people thought, what is he doing? This guy's going from McLaren, who weren't in a great spot then, but McLaren, and again, it speaks to kind of the journey McLaren's been on since then. McLaren used to just be, well, these guys are going to win. These guys are going to win again before Mercedes do. And then for him to move to Mercedes, everyone thought it's a crazy decision. And he even said it, didn't he? He said it started as a crazy dream or whatever it was, and it's become I forget the exact phrasing of it. That's what it felt like. It was kind of drawing the curtain on that, and we haven't really heard a huge amount of Ferrari stuff from Lewis, which I think's been telling. He it's been so long in the making. He actually said to us, it's been a bit at times like living with a girlfriend you've broken up with. The two of you are parting ways. Often Lewis has gone into this break without a new contract with Mercedes. Famously in 21, he did that. We didn't know if we'd see him in a race car again. But this was different. He was coming in, and he said the thing that stood out to me being there, lads, was he was saying, and he was saying it earlier in the year, wasn't he? Everything I'm doing is the last time. At one point, the European season was the last time he saw the big motorhome. He said in Abu Dhabi, getting into the race car, he was like, "It's the last time I'm doing this." It was the last time he had a kind of hug with Bono on the grid beforehand. And I think a lot of that, I saw him. I was stood right next to his car when he pulled into his grid slot, and you could see some emotion on his face. You don't always see that with Lewis, and we haven't seen it so much with him since maybe Silverstone. So yeah, it felt like that, and I think that I'm so glad it ended on a positive note, because there was a point in the year, I don't know if you felt the same, where I thought, maybe is this all going to end a little bit acrimoniously? Is this all going to end up a little bit toxic? And they've kind of kept that core respect and admiration for each other, which I think when you've won that much together, it's always a shame, isn't it, when you look at dynasties that fall apart at the end and they're kind of saying, it was all me. We've not got that. At least we've not got that yet. But it seems like they're leaving in such a good place. And I believe Toto when he says that. I think that he does want, if Mercedes can't win, I think the one person he'd want to win next season will be Lewis. I can really believe that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the case. The two of them still have a bond there. I think it was really stretched to breaking point at some points this year.
Which is understandable as well, right? Because of
course, I mean, it's a very awkward situation. If you turn around to your boss in January and say, by the way, by December, I'm going to go and work for your biggest rivals. And it's a little bit different to most people's jobs, because we're talking about the most competitive people pretty much in the world, but certainly in motorsport are in that sport. And you say, oh yeah, I'm going, I'm leaving. Everything that we built, you think of all the things that Mercedes and Lewis have done together, not just on track, but off track as well. All those partnerships, all the money involved.
Tommy Hilfiger, all those guys,
with being associated with Lewis Hamilton, that is all stuff that Toto's had to go and turn around and say to all those people who said, look, I've got him for 2 years, 2 years more. And it looked like he was going to retire with Mercedes. And all of a sudden, oh, actually, guys, sorry, by the way, Lewis has just informed me that he's off to Ferrari. Now, of course, that's going to be difficult. And I talked to Toto about this in Las Vegas. And, he said that while it was tricky, and obviously he revealed before that he found out via Carlos Sainz's father, of course, Carlos Sainz, the man that Lewis Hamilton is replacing at Ferrari. Toto said he found out via Carlos Sainz Sr., and then had that slightly awkward conversation around the kitchen table with Lewis. But he said, actually, now I look back at it, and this was reflecting on it, several months after, Toto said there was no real easier way to do it. How else could he have done this? Previously, the two sides had said they would always tell each other if they were talking to someone else, but was that really going to happen? And was that possible? And also, once Lewis had made his mind, Toto wasn't going to be able to talk him around and get him to stay. So I think the way it played out, the length of time that they had to kind of live together like that was a bit awkward. One nice thing, actually, just referencing this fabulous graphic made for us by our producer Quentin.
Great stuff, by the way. Really good.
So there you see Lewis in all red. That's how he turned up on the Sunday in Abu Dhabi. And did you see that over the weekend? So he started off in a white, then he went to black, then he went to kind of red/white, and then he went full red. I mean, knowing Lewis and his fashion, that was intentional.
Oh, absolutely. We've spoken to people in the paddock, and everything he wears it's either a brand he wants to support, it's a designer he wants to support. So absolutely, and I think that it's actually pretty cool. I like that some guys just turn up in team kit all the time. It'll be so interesting next year, won't it? Seeing Charles Leclerc as kind of the company man, isn't he? He'll turn up in the Ferrari Polo all the time. Always looks. I mean, he looks great in it. But I think I'm interested to see what Lewis is wearing next year. Some of the designs he's going to have. Just to your point as well, what was interesting on Sunday in the evening after the race, great sign-off race as well, I thought, for Lewis. Obviously, it wasn't the podium, but nice to have that moment at the end, that kind of clean fight with George. I think as well for Mercedes, that really summed up this partnership. They had some difficult times with Lewis and Nico. I think it was nice for them to show, especially after everything that George said about Max at the start of the weekend, I felt that there was a real, look, these two guys can keep it clean, and who knows how hard they're actually fighting each other. But in the pen afterwards, we sit, for people who are listening to this, we sit kind of just away from the TV pen, and we were watching Lewis's interviews, and actually we were kind of we were waiting for quite a while, because Lewis was, every interview he was giving so much to the journalists asking him questions. And at one point, I think he was talking to Craig Slater at Sky. He spoke to a few other people. After he spoke to Craig, he kind of stepped back for a second, just kind of, he leant over and put his hands on his knees for a bit, and just kind of, you could tell he needed a moment to himself. And I think that there were points during the weekend where that emotion got to him quite a lot, and you could tell, and Lewis has always been such an emotional guy. I think that a lot of that, he realised for the first time what was happening.
Well, in that Craig, because I was watching back home, so in that Craig Slater interview, he was asked about the final hammer time message.
That's right. Yes.
And
yes.
He said, in my mind, it went through my head that was the final hammer time message. And you could see, in his eyes just welled up that little bit. He didn't break down, didn't start crying or anything, but you could see just the emotion was fully there. So perhaps he had to take a moment after thinking about that. And that's the great thing about Lewis. He always wears his heart on his sleeve.
And just on that as well, that was cool. He said to us in the pen, we asked him about the hammer time mess, and he said, what's funny about that was that when I first started out, Bono would give me these really awkward, okay, Lewis, it's time to get a bit faster now. And he was like, just say it's hammer time, man. Just give me something clear. And it's become this iconic thing. So I wonder what he'll replace it with at Ferrari. Obviously not taking Bono with him. So I think that part of it as well with Lewis is quite interesting. What's going to happen next? That partnership. It's like Max with GP. It's almost part of their persona when they're at the team. So much to come with Lewis. And interested to see what happens with Merc without Lewis as well, because obviously he's their greatest driver ever. So,
indeed. Well, not the only change going into this winter, of course, by Lewis moving to Ferrari. Carlos Sainz has left. Now, Nate, you had a story.
3 Carloses here.
3 Carloses, varying emotions of leaving Ferrari right there. Nate, again, you were there. You wrote a story about this on the Sunday night. Where was Carlos's head up? Because leaving Ferrari, leaving a team that he's won races with, obviously has that connection with, probably the team that every driver wants to race for at some point. You certainly don't want to have to leave the team before your time. Yeah. And it's a downgrade going to Williams. Let's not beat around it. I mean, Williams, hopefully they've got a great few seasons ahead of them, but it's a downgrade, isn't it?
Downgrade, and a downgrade he didn't want to make as well. It's different if you're leaving the team and you think there's a natural conclusion to this relationship, we want a title together, whatever. And also for Carlos, I think when you look at his career has just been this, hasn't it? It's been a slow clawing up. He was at Toro Rosso, obviously that didn't work. Renault was frustrated when he was there. Really kind of broke out at McLaren, but really it wasn't until he got to Ferrari that I think people really saw him as this top tier driver. And I think he's always had that chip on his shoulder. I think that the name Carlos Sainz has probably helped and hindered him at different times. I think that a lot of people think, why is this guy as good as all the hype that there's been around him? And when he was coming up alongside Max. I think there's always been something that Carlos looks at. It's like, people just do not give me the credit I deserve. And I think he races like that as well. He races with that chip on his shoulder. He actually said one of the things that he was conscious of all weekend when he qualified third and he finished second. He actually said it. I mean, he's not minced his words. He said, I might not be back up here for 2 years, he said. So he's not even deluding himself into thinking, it might be 1 year. It could be into 26. It could be a long time. But he's been forced into that situation. So I think there was a lot of that going on. I think as well, I remember in Monza, I asked him about what his memories of the first time he drove a Ferrari was. And he said, I was fine until I looked over and I looked at Carlos Sainz Sr., his dad. He didn't call him Carlos Sainz Sr., he called him dad. And he saw that his dad was crying. And he was like, I realized how much it meant. You know, his dad had seen him race for multiple teams, but it was Ferrari that kind of got him. And I think you're right. That does seem to happen. I mean, there's just this magnetism that Ferrari has. I mean, proven by the fact that Lewis is going there when he's nearly 40 years old. I mean, he will be 40, I think, won't he, in January? But yeah, I think the biggest thing, one of the Spanish journalists asked Carlos on Sunday, how are you holding all of the emotion in? You know, and he's like, how do you know I am? How do you know I have? You know, he's like, for you know, I've been crying away from the public view. I think Carlos is a bit like that as well. You know, I think some of those moments when the visor was down, I think that's when it would have hit him. He said that actually it was going to the grid, not getting out of the car, but climbing into the car that he felt it. Like, this is the last time I'm going to get into a Ferrari as a racing driver. And it's very easy to see these guys race and just think, oh, they don't think about that stuff. But they do. They have these things, you know, these things eat away at them and stuff like that. So I really hope that we get to see Carlos Sainz back in a top drive, because I think he's fantastic. You know, I think it's, if you're Ferrari, someone's got to make way for Lewis Hamilton. It's not like he's being dropped for a driver that everyone's like, well, why are they doing that for? You know, so in a way, I suppose he can take some comfort in that, and I think that maybe that's helped him. I think he's said that, hasn't he? Easier to be giving up the seat for Lewis. But I think a difficult weekend all around. But a bit like Lewis's win at Silverstone, I really think his win in Mexico was really big, because I think it was just like, right, I've done it. End of the season, towards the end of the season, have got this win. It's like, I'm not going to be wondering, if only I'd got a win at the end of the year. I know he got one early, but I think then it was still so far away leaving. That was a nice moment. So it was a shame to see, but I think Carlos he's got such a smart way of looking at things. He was already saying during the race, he was thinking, like, remember how this car feels, because as we speak right now, he's testing the Williams car that he's going to be driving next year. So he's already kind of got his head in that place. And I think that ultimately is the best way for him to kind of get over the slight of having to leave.
Yeah, I think the other difficulty for Sainz leaving is, of course, he's part of this team that has come really close to winning a championship. And he's been a big building part of that. You know, I think you can sometimes overlook the drivers. Sometimes the drivers probably get overplayed in a team's success. But I think Carlos has been crucial. That Carlos-Charles partnership, they really complement each other. They're both, drivers with different skill sets. I think Lewis is going to bring his own stuff, and actually probably that little bit more that might push Ferrari right up there, because he takes all the knowledge of Mercedes and all those championship winning years. But Carlos has got to look at that and say, God, I was close to getting, the championship across the line. Of course, it wouldn't have been his championship, it would have been the team's, but that still would have meant something for him. So, like I say, he's been in the car already, the Williams. He did a filming day on Monday. He did his test day on Tuesday, which was part of the postseason test in Abu Dhabi. Of course, very early days, not much you can tell. It's basically just day zero, trying to get to know everyone, get to know some of the processes, understand what needs to be done, just how far away that car is from the front of the grid. So what can we expect from Williams next year? Because this year has been tough for them.
Yeah, really tough. And I think that probably has made his year a bit more uncomfortable, is the fact that there's not really been a moment when Williams' season's turned around in that sense. There was so much going on in Australia when we were still talking about where Carlos was going to drive, obviously when they just had to bench Sargent for the race. And it just never seemed to be a point in the year where it really made a clear jump forward. I think the good thing Williams has got is that this seemed like just put this year in the dustbin, didn't it? It felt like there's so much bad stuff going on. They were still scoring points when they could. They had the Colapinto experiment, which, I think has maybe been, there's been good and there's been bad. Sainz coming in, to your point about testing out processes, that's mutually beneficial. He's going to see so much of that team. I think he's going to help drag them up to a level. As good as I think Alex Albon is, he's not a race winner. He's not had that experience of competing at the front end. Carlos has. And I think that with him and Vowles together, I actually am quite excited about that. So I think it'll be a better year. What we're seeing with these new regulations, or these current regulations, is that one good upgrade can move you quite far up, whatever pecking order it is you're in, whichever bit of it. So I think it'll be a better year, but yeah, it's difficult at the moment to really feel super optimistic about Williams, because I feel like out of the whole grid, their season was the most consistently bad, because even Alpine had that double podium. So Alpine it would have been Alpine, then they had Brazil. Whereas Williams, it was always just kind of down here. So I think that's the biggest problem probably facing him right now.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.